project is that we're after, you know. I'm just trying to say, not that that's something the committee had to do. I'm just trying, I guess, a generic question here. When do we as a board have to prioritize them for submission to the state board?
I would think whenever you would want to entertain to do a project. The first deadline comes up in, I think, November, December for state funding, and you would have to pick your project and get your funding in line to do that. But it's whatever time. You could do it now. You could do it after you submit the plan. It's whenever you choose as a board to do that.
Each year we meet with the SBA and submit a project. Now we didn't last year because we had just received so much from them and we knew we wouldn't get anything. But what we would do, we would come together and discuss where's the major need, where do we want to put the money if we were to get the money, and we would decide that and how much we would need and how much we could put in if we decided to try to pass a bond or whatever. And we would meet before the SBA and submit this to the SBA, and that doesn't mean that they will give us the money at the time when we submit it, but it means that we have put in a request, and then they will weigh everybody's request, and they may very well give us money. And even with us not expecting it, we may very well get it.
Good. I understand that, but once again, so based on that, it come November, whenever that you said it was, so do we then by November have to do some prioritizing? All I'm asking is a generic question here.
Well, let me answer part of your question you asked for the consensus to start with. Each group, as we met, we were assigned different groups, from facilities to curriculum to finance. There's several different parts of it, and the groups themselves would come with what they would think from that particular meeting and present as an overall to the group for a consensus on that part. And that's kind of where we got to on consensus on that. Speaking for myself and from what I understood, a little bit different from Mr. Ferguson, I do think that the committee's consensus was that the Guyan Valley School be the first project to be considered. However, with the size of that thing, we're looking at possibly or more than likely having to be a bond issue run, which then that becomes an issue that the board will have to decide whether it's something they want to do at that time or not.
Well, would that be any different like that for some of these other projects?
Probably not. Probably. Well, some of them aren't large enough that would consider that. What is it, Dana, for the school improvement money?
There's two types of funding. Sorry, Dana, you want to answer? You go ahead. There's basically two types of state funding you can go after. One is called a MIP, Major Improvement Fund. That's up to $1 million. There's another type of funding called a needs project, and that is, pretty much several $1 million. If you're entertaining going for a bond, that's going to take about a year to plan and whatever. It's going to take quite a bit of time to do such a thing. But in the meantime, I would, as far as you're concerned, I would think I would submit on at least an MIP project up to $1 million every year, if you have the need for that, because you can always, that funding is much easier to get than a needs project. They hand out $1 million grants a lot faster than they do $10, $20, $30 million grants. So and you don't have to have the match as you would on a needs project.
But our most pressing needs may not be those kind of projects. But see, now we've talked a little bit here about the committee at least at some point discuss what might be right.
Well, one of the problems with us actually doing a prioritization, we had people from every community here.
Well, that's why we were hoping you do it.
And I said, in our communities, we had a few very good discussions, especially when we were talking about Ranger and some of the small schools. Some people from one part of the county may or may not think that we could consolidate that with a larger school or whatever. So those things kind of got to be a little bit bigger discussions than what our committee would be willing to handle at the time, and we didn't want to get to the point where that everyone was taking sides and becoming argumentative versus getting a project done for a school system. So we let you guys that get paid the big bucks up there make that decision.
Well, because once again, just looking at the school system in general, and considering our facilities, I think they've come a long way. But I agree with you, Guyan Valley Middle is certainly, right there at the top. But I think also the Duval pre-K-5 school is right there at the top. I'm not saying ones that have it, but I look at that as a direct need opposed to not Ranger. Something needs to be done there. But the other schools are kind of there. You got nice facilities. They could be upgraded. But those 2 or 3 seem to be like higher priorities.
When we were talking about the situation with the Duval and the Guyan Valley, you know, if you're going to have a bond in the county, you're not going to say, I'm going to do a bond and do just Guyan Valley this year.
Right.
In order to get, that's something that you have to have countywide, and you may have to have a project in each county. So even though we may say a priority for one part or the other, we would want to make sure that if we're doing something large on this side, and the taxpayers from this other side of the county are going to have to be paying for it as well, that they get something for their area as well. So.
I understand that.
Go ahead,
I
Kevin.
have a question. I'm looking at the needs assessment for the particular schools. The enrollment capacity utilization that I was looking at here, looking at the Midway Elementary and the Duval PK through 8, looking at that, has anyone taken into account the utilization of those particular schools? And the numbers that are indicated right here, was that at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year?
My clearest understanding is we had to have a full year of information, so we used school year 2009.
So, of course, as you said, the numbers will change.
They're
sure.
definitely liquid.
And as we move forward, going into the 2010-2011 school year, I'm sure these numbers will increase, decrease, and from that, we will be able to define our needs assessment for, as far as, you know, if we're looking at a school that probably would need to be built.
Right, the SBA requires that we use projected numbers, and if you look through the book, there's a section there that has the projected enrollments on those facilities over the next 10 years. And that's how they base your funding. Yeah, unless you can prove that you've got more kids than is projected in the book, that's how your funding will be based. If you went to a new school and you wanted to consolidate 2 schools, they would use those numbers, and unless you could prove to them that yes, you've had a big increase in that area in housing or something that's going to boost those numbers, they would use the numbers that WVU projected for that area. And that's just how they can, that gives them a guide, you know, on how they fund their projects.
So the committee has pretty well done the footwork for us, but when it comes into the major decisions and getting the backlash from the community, it's going to be us.
They're well positioned.
Well, what we hope that we, with this plan though, that we won't get backlash from the community. We've actually got something that we will get support from our community.
For everybody, right.
Dwight, each one of these sections, were they completed by different groups of people?
Yes, they were. And that was there was some misconception on how some of that, and one thing, we felt at times that we would have needed more of the expertise of people working for the school system. I mean, I know we had people from the schools, things that know their area of curriculum, but sometimes we thought we would have needed more of the specialists from the county office to help us determine some of the needs, and especially when we're talking about the curriculum and some of the courses and things of that nature, graduation requirements and all. But
I have a general question. Is there a difference between, I saw different terminology as to program utilization and building utilization. I saw those different terms. Are they different? Or are we just talking about like capacity in space utilization? But there's also a term of program utilization.
I'd have to see how it was used, but I know the capacity is basically rated on how you design the building. You basically design it, the ideal capacity in a building is 85%. That way you can have a little bit of room for growth, and when it gets to the 90 to the 100%, or some of those might be even more than 100%, you need to either add on significantly to all your space and not just classrooms, but your core spaces as well. Or you need to look at either moving kids out into another school, redistricting, or doing something else in that facility. That's how the SBA will also, that's another factor they take into consideration when funding a project, and how large the project, how large the facility actually is on a new facility.
And I think
Okay,
it's,
so it's synonymous? Is that what
I think